Brian has spent his career in enterprise AI and data. He did a PhD in information systems, then went into industry, holding leadership roles at several companies in Australia and abroad. He's been an assistant director of Australia's Bureau of Meteorology, the CTO of an AI startup, and the head of data architecture at one of Australia's big four banks. As a director of a major university and a member of its AI board, he met the challenges of adopting AI in its very early days. Most recently, Brian was Chief AI Officer, advising organizations across government, utilities, and global retail on turning AI strategy into something that actually drives value. He's one of the few people who have held the CAIO role in the country, and one of the more honest voices on what actually works when it comes to technology. Brian, I want to jump in with the first question.
Sure.
To get started, let's talk about who in Australia you think is actually doing really good work when it comes to AI that not enough people are talking about.
Sure. Well, as per our preamble, I'd talk about us first, of course. Sovereign AI, we're developing an Australian AI model at the moment, based on Australian data, hosted in Australia, subject to Australian laws and standards, and obviously usable for and by Australians. So that's going very well. I think it's a great concept. I must admit, a lot of the pushback that I've seen and pushback I had myself when the concept was pitched was, why would you want to develop a model in Australia? You've got the large players spending $100 million US a pop to develop their models, which they then, push out to hundreds of millions of users. Why would we reinvent the wheel? But then, shortly after that, I think the Microsoft direction from the US Department of Defense, I think it was, came out, no, Department of Justice, I apologize, directing Microsoft to hand over data from its data centers in theaters of operation outside of the United States, which I think brought home to everyone that, notwithstanding Microsoft's assertions that it is able to support principles of data sovereignty in all of the theaters that it works in, they are still subject to direction by the US government. And I think that put the wind up everybody for obvious reasons. And then, of course, shortly after that, we had the Fable fiasco, whereby the DoD directed Anthropic to withdraw Fable from the market under the auspices of national security. Those two things were sort of a 1-2 blow that really created an open door for us to walk through in terms of the business case for an Australian model. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this happening. It is easier to do now because compute is much cheaper and more prevalent. You've got a lot of model optimization techniques that have come out. DeepSeek's done some amazing work in this area in optimization techniques. And then you've got, approaches to model training that don't involve the kind of brute force methods that we were using, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So, I'm very excited by this. We're about to release in a very short space of time our sort of prototype model, and then I'm hoping hang on with both hands. So we're doing some good stuff. There's that.
Absolutely. So you and you're working, is it mainly with Simon?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So Simon's our, sort of visionary CEO. He's kicked off the concept. He's the guy who makes things happen. So what I've learned about Simon is that he knows everybody. I've had random subsequent conversations with people unrelated and dropped Simon's name, and they say, "Oh, yeah, Simon." He seems to be everywhere. He's omnipresent in the Australian business community, I think. So, yeah.
And can you share any more about where you're at with what you're doing? How much of that can you disclose?
Look, I mean, obviously, some of the commercials are going to be a little bit sensitive, but what I can tell you is we've got a model approach. Which I've sort of shaped up and pitched to Simon. Everyone seems to be happy with the model approach. We've got a working corpus of data, a subset, a specific domain that we're going to start with to establish not only the value proposition, but also to build connections with existing clients that we've got talking. And we're starting with the infrastructure as well, which seems to that all seems to be squared away. Funding obviously is still in train, but that's looking very good at the moment. So those sorts of things I think are progressing quite nicely. Remaining tasks for us, or at least for me anyway, are to fine-tune some of the data curation aspects, which that's a part of every AI project. I don't know if you know, but 95% of an AI project is data. It's data curation, data cleansing, data schema. All the things you need to do to get your ducks in a row before you actually do all the exciting stuff and start running the models and doing inference and so forth. So yes, it's coming together much quicker than I had expected it to do. And I think over the next few weeks we'll have something to announce to the market. If Simon is listening, I'm sorry to drop you in it, Simon, but yeah, I think that's a realistic timeline.
Simon's actually coming on next week.
Excellent. He can tell you all the things I got wrong. No, it's not that. Anyway, we'll see how we go. Look, I'm very excited. I think it's going extremely well, and I have very high hopes for what comes next.
That's very exciting. Very exciting. I know. Yeah, this has been in the works for a while, so it's so good to finally see something come to the market. I'm really pumped.
Yeah. And look, as I said, we're pushing against an open door right now because data sovereignty has become an absolutely central conversation to everybody. Data security and all of these other aspects that were, really on the back burner up until now. But the latest actions from the US government and also actions from the Europeans. So I don't know if you know, but Europeans, starting with Spain, are starting to kick out companies like Palantir. They're asking very serious questions about the deployment of the more pervasive models, OpenAI and Anthropic's models. They're looking at other things. They're even kicking out Microsoft, and looking at alternatives for them. The browser wars, are back on, at least in the US, and they've got their own open source browser which is being pushed. So, look, there's a number of things now that really create a perfect storm for this kind of pitch. So, yeah, super exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. I think I understand how you build these models, but I guess one question I keep coming back to is the whether you take one of the open source ones or some other model and then you'll find what do you fork it and fine tune it versus building one from scratch. How do you think? What do you think is the best approach there for us in Australia?
Look, it does depend on the application and the domain. In our case, we're going to be looking at an open weights model as a starting point. It would be foolish not to do that. If you're working with very specific domains, so there's a lot of work, as I'm sure you've heard, going on in the biotech industry. Protein folding would be a great example, given the recent Nobel Prize, and other things. For those, bespoke models that start from scratch are a lot more appealing and justifiable. If you're looking at text-based LLM models, it doesn't really make sense to start from scratch, particularly given there are so many open weights models. And you can start with something small, your sort of entry-level 7 billion parameter model, and then I think most of the mainstream models now are up around the 100 billion mark. There are some now that have been put out there that are several hundred billions. I think the largest one I've seen from memory is 670 billion, something like that. And they'll keep climbing. You don't have to jump into those straight away, but certainly if you're at the point, if you're doing this kind of work and you're at the point where you want a starting point, it doesn't make sense to try and reinvent the wheel. That's going to cost you a lot of money and time and pain. It makes sense instead to start from a known point and then move from there. And there are a number of ways you can resolve that. Fine-tuning is the obvious thing. I'm not a big fan of fine-tuning, but that's just my 2 cents. I like techniques like LoRa. LoRa's, technically speaking, LoRa is a fine-tuning technique, but not really in my view. For the reason I think it's not is because it doesn't alter the underlying model's weights. it adds to them. It's what's called an adapter overlaid on the top of the model. That's an extremely good technique for getting quick, low compute requirement adaptations of a model to specific domains or to specific outcomes. So that's a really good approach. I like those kinds of approaches. The other side of this, of course, is you don't have to do model training to solve most business problems, in my view. So I'm a big fan of RAG as a technique. I think RAG is, it's very well established now. It's been around 2 or 3 years, probably 2 years now. And there are some very well established best practices in the use of RAG. It's a great approach if you've got something like a corpus of knowledge that's unstructured and you want to try and make sense of it and apply it and use it. And I strike this a lot in enterprises, because you go into every enterprise, there's an intranet with hundreds of thousands of pages of information. No one can find anything. No one knows what's correct or current. And every time you do a search, you'll get 1,000 hits. The one you're looking for is number 500. These things are essentially vestigial repositories of data. You can throw RAG at that and get very quick and really impressive results. So you don't need to do model training, I guess, is the conclusion there, if you don't want to.
Let's zoom out from RAG for a second. Looking at AI as a whole, what do you think the implications are for everyday Australians?
Well, I think the implications are the same as they are for anybody, really, across the planet. I mean, this is, as everyone is wont to say, this is a disruptive technology. It is disrupting every aspect of business. It's disrupting society itself. It is disrupting our work norms. It's a tool that, people draw analogies between what's happening in AI now and what happened during the Industrial Revolution. And there are some strong parallels there. I don't think it's quite perfect. I actually use a different analogy for some areas, some applications. But in terms of disruption, that's huge. And the main one to me is not really about the technology. It's about what is going to happen in the workplace. If we do use the Industrial Revolution analogy as an analogy, at that time, you might remember, the implementation of machines to automate manual labour was done by and owned by corporations. And those corporations took all the benefits of that increased efficiency. And there was massive disruption to the employment sector, of course. People lost their jobs. There's a lot of disenfranchisement. There was a lot of panic and so forth. And eventually you got, unionization, and you got massive social disruption and effectively a revolution. And out of that came the norms that we all take for granted today, which is 8-hour workdays, 5 days a week, weekends, etc. Before that time, people don't know or remember, before that time, it was basically slave labor. It was people working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and no constraints, and and so forth. A similar thing is going to happen now, and we need to decide as a culture within Australia how we're going to manage that. Because if we're not careful, all the benefits will go to the large corporates, and we're going to get a further suppression of our middle class and our lower classes, and people will eventually be, completely displaced, and that's going to tear apart the social fabric in Australia. I don't want to sound hyperbolic here or hysterical, but this really is what we're dealing with at the moment. It is something quite crucial. So we need to decide how we're going to manage that. I have my own ideas how we need to manage it, but we'll see how we go.
Got it. And I guess that's where Sovereign AI Australia, that's where that idea comes in, I suppose. I never actually thought of it like that. I guess, so all the benefits that are accruing from AI won't flow completely overseas. At least we'll retain some here, in a way. We'll
maintain some domain specificity, as in, the theatre of operation will be focused on Australia. Australian laws, Australian constraints, etc., will be subject to Australian privacy law and other standards, Australian security laws in certain scenarios, etc. So it'll be suitable for deployment in Australia. As to where the benefits go, I mean, that's an open question, and that's exactly the issue that I'm trying to raise. I mean, my own, and I'm stepping aside now and I'm speaking personally. My own view is that we're at a crucial point in our development worldwide as a society. If we do this right, the benefits will be spread between workers and companies. If we do this right, I can see us moving to, say, a 4-day work week as the standard. And then benefits are accrued by individuals because our standard work week becomes 4 days, and companies who will get increased efficiencies through the deployment or the augmentation of their people by AI, and everybody wins. If we do this in a balanced way and we do this right. If we don't do it right, corporations soak up all the benefits by deploying AI. They displace massive amounts of their workforce, and then everyone's left holding the bag. So it's a crucial point. We have to decide how we're going to manage this.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm hoping that you guys can help us play a big role in that.
Well, we'll see. And look, to be honest, I haven't broached these issues with Simon in any depth. We're focusing mostly on the practical aspects of getting the product out the door and of funding partners and our clients. So these more philosophical discussions, I think, will probably come a little bit further down the track. But I know that for Simon, ethics is certainly near the top of the list. So it will be something that we need to deal with.
I think I'm going to jump into your last role. So you've moved kind of into the sovereign AI space, which is amazing, fascinating. I guess it's a natural progression from where you've been if you look back at your career and your trajectory. I am really curious though about your last role, which was a chief AI officer role. I think people will be wondering, what do chief AI officers actually do day to day?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. And look, the short answer is it changes over time, and it's certainly changed over the past 3 years or so. But look, I should say that, so when the CEO and I put together the role, I was in a very privileged position in that I got to help design the role itself. Most of the time in the roles that I've held, you're stepping into a role that's already been defined, and they've brought you on board. For this one, I got to shape it. And at the time, I remember thinking, we've got CDO and CFO and CMO and CEO, etc. Where's the chief AI officer? And so, I took up that mantle. We spent a lot of energy defining very specifically the responsibilities therein. And literally a month later, I think there was an article in, I want to say Wall Street Journal, something like that, saying Chief AI Officer, the sexiest new role in IT, something like that, right? So it was fantastic timing, and I think we really nailed it in those terms. In terms of the role's responsibilities, as I said, they have morphed, and I'd say 4 things, from how it stands now. And the first one is really helping stakeholders understand what's really going on. I mean, that's the key thing here. AI is an incredibly fast-moving space. There's a lot of, can I swear on this podcast?
Go for it. It's Australia.
It's Australia. That's true. That's very true. There's a lot of bullshit out there. I mean, seriously, snake oil is not strong enough a word for what's going on. I mean, there's just stuff that's coming out that's just nonsense, and coming out from, the big 4 consulting companies, from vendors, from mainstream sources. That's just nonsense. And a large part of what I do is try and hose down some of that hype and tease it apart and help stakeholders, executive stakeholders, to understand, what's real, what's not, what's the BS, and what's actually something we can grab hold of. That's key, because competent executives, in my experience anyway, they're like generals, right? And they need to know the lay of the land. They need to know what's actually happening so they can make good decisions. And those, to be clear, those decisions are not always based on the intel you provide them. There are other considerations, of course, but at least they need that in order to understand what's going on. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing, I think, is to help devise strategies. Companies, my view is companies that don't have strategies for any aspect of what they do are really taking a massive risk. If you don't have a strategy, you don't know where you're going. That's what that means. So developing AI strategies is what I've been doing a lot of over the past 3 years or so. And then even that task has changed from what it was to what we're dealing with now as a reflection, I guess, of the way the technology has evolved as well. 3 years ago, well, maybe 2 years ago, it was all the questions that I was getting were, is this real? What do I need to know? Where are the risks? What do I tell my board? Those kinds of things. And then it went to, okay, how do we devise a strategy? What's the best path to ROI, etc. And now it's something like, okay, I've been playing with all these shiny toys for a year now. Where's my return on investment? How do I get people on the train? What's going to actually deliver? So those strategy questions have changed quite a lot in a short space of time. The third thing I think would be the oversight for implementation. So once we get to the stage where we want to move, we want to do something, an organization wants to do something, then you've got to make it real. You've got to start to implement. And for that, I draw upon skills from architecture as well as AI and data and so forth. I've run a lot of projects, almost all of them agile-based. Agile is really the only way, in my view, you can implement AI these days. It's just moving too fast. You can't do anything but agile. And that means there's a lot of risk because, despite what some people think, agile requires more discipline than waterfall, not less. And when the wheels come off, it's very messy. So oversight, making sure things stay on track is the right thing to do. And when things do start to go, my job is to call bullshit a lot of the time, which is super tough because a lot of times people don't want to hear that, but it's got to be done, and you've got to retask or rethink or whatever you need to do. And then the final one I think is staying current, and that's something that's part of any role is staying current. It's, implicitly what you have to do. But for AI, it's explicit. You've got to actually do it explicitly because it takes a lot of time. It's a big chunk of your role. Staying current in, data, let's say, which I've done enormous amounts of work in, that's 5% of your time. Staying current in AI would be 30% of my time. Like it's reading papers, reading product launches, understanding the depths of the technology, reading case studies, talking to people, all those kinds of things you need to do. That's what you need to invest in order to stay current. It's just moving so quickly. So they're kind of the four things as an overview. There are other stuff. There's other things as well, but that's mostly what you do in the role.
Got it. And you mentioned at the beginning of that answer that a lot of the strategy out there and the things that consulting companies are selling aren't just a BS. And so I'm curious to know, I think a lot of, and by the way, I'm sure you speak with a lot of business owners and executives. I speak on my end, they're more small to medium-sized businesses usually. You're probably more, the enterprise level. But everyone is feeling that same pain of how do you judge these consultancies? They've got these pitch decks that look really nice. It seems to make sense. They're charging quite a lot. How do you know if something that a company is suggesting is actually smart and it's useful?
Yeah, look, that's super tough because, as I said, there's a lot of snake oil out there. There are a few rules of thumb, a few heuristics that I'd apply. Number one is, if someone's selling a solution, as in a packaged solution of some kind, be very wary. And I'm not saying that solutions, out-of-the-box solutions that are domain-specific or specific to one business problem aren't real. It's just that most of them, in my experience, are not. So just be very, very wary. I wouldn't spend any money in the initial stages if that's what you want to do as an organization, particularly if you're a small organization or a mid-sized organization. It's just too dangerous. You've got to do a little bit of due diligence first just to make sure things are real. And there's some questions you can ask, if you, depending on the approach you're taking. The first thing I think would be, what business problem are you trying to solve? That's the first thing. And that can be a chicken and egg, because sometimes you can't answer that question because you don't know what AI can do. You don't know its extent. Okay, so sometimes the answer to that question is, well, it depends. How can AI help me? And that in itself is a moving target. But you need to ask that question, and you need to keep asking that question. What business problem are we solving? The amusing story that I always remember, I don't know if you've seen The Simpsons, that cartoon. Do you remember the episode on the monorail? Do you remember that? There's an episode where the town is considering how it's going to spend its money and what next infrastructure project they're going to work on. And a sort of charismatic spruiker comes in front of the town hall and literally using song and dance convinces the town that what they need is a monorail. Right? Whereas very obviously that's a crazy thing. And people watch that and they think that's amusing and, obviously this is crazy. And then go off and spend money, millions of dollars, on some snake oil AI solution. I consider those things comparable, and that's why I use that example. You don't need a monorail. You need something that's going to solve an actual business problem. So think about what you need to do, and then look at how AI is going to solve that. So that'd be the first questions that I'd ask. And it's very difficult because AI is a very appealing technology. It does amazing things and people are quite impressed by it. And it's easy to get swept up in that. But, you need to exercise the normal due diligence you would with any technology as a business and be very clear about the business problem that you're applying to. And then the next thing I would look at is, okay, you find something, you get a scenario, some kind of a use case that you think is going to be applicable. Stay very focused on that. So you get your use case in place, you're convinced there's a business case, you've got the money, you've got the skills and the people, etc., and you start to execute. Stay focused. AI is quite seductive. It's very easy to get distracted across into other things in the middle of an execution because you find out what things are possible. And, oh my God, we can automate all of these business processes over here, and, we can put it in our call center, and, we can do all these things. Amazing. If you do that, then you tend to lose focus. Your people become exhausted. You blow the budget, and you don't end up delivering ROI. You end up with 5 different half-finished initiatives that don't really address what you've been looking at. So stay very disciplined until you start to get that ROI and you start to prove the case, etc. So those would be the main things. I think there's a bunch of other stuff we can get into if you'd like to.
Yeah, I think a lot of business owners and directors that I speak to, I think part of them knows they should look at their current business and think, okay, what is the problem that I can solve with AI? But a lot of them, I think that they've more got fear of missing out. They're like, okay, this is how we're currently doing things. Yes, we could do that with AI. That's kind of boring, but imagine what else we could potentially do with AI that we're not doing now at all. So it's like there's lots of these possibilities, and I find they get really, really confused, almost like it's like they're just spinning their wheels in place because they see all of this shiny stuff. What would you say to someone who's in that position?
I would say 2 things. So first of all, you're not missing out. That would be my first thing, right? So even Gartner, January this year or February this year, indicated that 95% of AI initiatives do not proceed to production. Right? And there's a very good reason for that. People have these FOMO drives or these, what would I say, misaligned expectations of the technology itself and what it can do. And they start to execute, and lo and behold, they realize it's not viable. Oftentimes, how these things work with any technology, right? Any change, you'll get executive sponsors who've got skin in the game. They do not want to be seen to fail. So they will double down and try and push through initiatives that are clearly not working. And so you'll see, I've seen at recent conferences, a case study of a successful AI implementation that's complete bullshit. Like, it's just nonsense. It's a straw man, essentially. It's an implementation that, is often presented in partnership between a client and the service provider or the product developer. You'll see a lot of that. So my entreaty to the people you're talking to would be understand what's going on under the covers. There's a lot of nonsense out there. There's a lot of misrepresentation. You are not missing out. Okay, that'd be the first thing I'd say. The second thing is that I would say, and I'm being very harsh here, and this is not the way that I would speak to a client. I'm speaking to you, and I'm speaking, I guess, openly to your audience. It doesn't matter if you feel like you're missing out. It's irrelevant, right? The role when you're an executive sponsor is to make things work, right? So it's got to be real. It's got to produce a benefit of some kind. So if you feel you're missing out, just put that aside and focus on what's real, what's in front of you, right? What are the business problems that are most amenable to an AI solution or augmentation? What's really going to work for you? What's within your budget, within your risk tolerance, within the skill set of your people, and focus on that, right? Because if you manage to deliver to that, you will be in the top 5%, right? Just by doing that. And then, of course, if you are getting real return on investment that you can iterate on and you can expand sideways by using your implementation as a template for further implementations, then you're off to the races. And there's nothing, I think, nails your imprimatur as an executive than a successful delivery that produces real, quantifiable, demonstrable business outcomes.
So the other thing, and I think one thing, a trend I've been noticing, I mean, maybe not a trend, more of a pattern I'm noticing. I noticed it myself first. And as I started to speak with more people working in the space, whether they're engineers or heads of AIs or just business owners, directors, I've noticed a lot of them, they try to implement AI, or their goal is to implement AI, but when they actually do what you were recommending and say they focus down on the real business use case and they think, okay, this is the place where we're going to add it. A lot of the time, it's either, maybe it's different in your experiences, but it's often nothing to do with AI. Like, it's just a straight up automation or series of automations or series of scripts running on schedules, number one. Or number two, it's not doing anything sexy at all. Like, it's literally just, I was speaking yesterday to someone who's head of data and AI at a private equity firm, and they just do the basics really, really well. So they'll do investment research, they'll do investment reports, they'll do memos. And then I was speaking to an engineer last week, and when I asked him about his most successful AI implementation, it was for a project management company that literally ingested in all of the meeting minutes and converted it into reports. So that I guess the two main things that I'm seeing are they're either not AI at all, these solutions that end up going in, and a lot of the time they're just really basic things that humans would have to manually do, and they just are able to automate that with maybe a few API calls to an LLM. Yep. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Absolutely, and I've been seeing that, pretty much not since the beginning, but maybe since 2024, late 24, early 25. I think exactly that. So just before the agentic wave kicked off, you're absolutely spot on, and there's a harsh reality to this, which I'll come to at the end of my condemnation, I guess, of these kinds of misuses or mislabeling of AI. What we're seeing a lot of, you're exactly right. It's either standard RPA or something similar with a bit of AI sugar on the top that's been rebranded as AI. And RPA has been around for 20 years, right? I mean, we know how this works, and it can be very successful if you do it right. And the other side of it, of course, is just traditional data science stuff. So, I mean, everything from logistic regression to PCA or SVMs or, whatever statistical technique you're using, those are still very effective methods for data analysis and for other things. I recall back in, well, I'll give you the recent one. So 20 years ago or thereabouts, I think, it was realized, this is a trope that's been trotted out many, many times. It's got the archetypal trope of putting, if you're a supermarket, putting beer in the nappy aisle. Have you heard this one? So, like I said, this is a trope that goes back 20 years. Who buys the nappies is the question. Well, it's the guys. And the reason is very simple. And, as a father of two girls, I remember quite clearly, you're always running out of nappies. And when something happens, which I won't get into, but, it's messy, the scenario is always the same. There's mum with the baby handling the mess, and she says to dad, go down to the supermarket and buy some more nappies. We've run out. And so the guy goes down to the supermarket. Now, you get to the nappy aisle, and there's beer. And the guy thinks, I might as well just grab a six-pack while I'm here, right? Now, that insight came from just standard statistical analysis of buying patterns, the understanding that the purchases of this nature, so sort of what would I call it, urgent purchases or bespoke purchases, was mostly males under those circumstances. That came from an analysis of buying patterns and buying habits. And as a result, this kind of determination was made. So there's a lot of these, basic statistical analyses can produce quite profound outcomes. I remember working with PG&E, which is a large energy provider in the United States. My team was doing an analysis of their data for the purposes of bad debtors, so people who don't pay their bills, right? And ostensibly, the plan was to try and identify features or characteristics that helped us to identify potential bad debtors, and then they could use mitigation strategies to try and reduce that or manage those customers. What we found from our basic statistical analysis, what we found was that there is a subset of bad debtors who always pay their bill. They always pay it late, they always pay the penalty fee, and they never complain. But they always pay, right? Now, if it hadn't been for the statistical analysis we'd done, we would never have found that subset. And that subset, you want to keep those people. You don't want to get rid of them. They're technically bad debtors, but they're actually improving your revenue. They don't leave. They don't ultimately default. They always pay, but they pay late, and they always pay their penalty fees, and they don't complain. You want to keep them. So these kinds of statistical analyses, these have been around for a long time, and these continue to be very valuable, particularly now that we've got so much more data than we used to have. So you're quite right. There's, rebadged traditional orchestration methods, RPA and other things, and there's, standard statistical methods which continue to be valuable. Now, the caveat that I talked about before, after my long rambling, I'll come back to it now. There is a caveat to this, and that is that unfortunately, much to my, chagrin, I guess, it is the case that a traditional RPA implemented under the auspices of an AI program can succeed where it might have failed otherwise. That's just the reality. AI is, it's super sexy, it's current, people think they're on the cutting edge, and they're much more likely, in some cases, to embrace the changes of a traditional RPA program if it's labeled as AI. So people continue to misrepresent what they're doing as AI with the full knowledge that what they're doing is not AI, but hoping to use that imprimatur to push through programs that otherwise might have been much more problematic. So that's the reality.
Fascinating. And I guess you've probably seen a number of enterprise AI projects up pretty close.
I've seen a few. Yeah, I've seen a few. Not as, I mean, look, it hasn't been around that long. So, if you're consulting with a company or you're part of the BAU of a company, AI has really only been around since, 2023, I guess, technically, but not really. I mean, 2024 is when things really started to get up ahead of steam. So you're talking, 2 years, just over 2 years. It's been around, maybe pushing on to 3 for some early adopters. So no one has seen that many implementations. I've seen a few, but yeah, it's still an evolving space. And now we've got, agentic on board. We've got things like Fable, which is certainly changing what's possible in many ways, and that's been the case with the release of each of the models over the past couple of years or so. There have been some paradigm shifts, some real stepwise changes in the efficacy and applicability of those models.
I'd love to dig into the agentic term because it gets a lot of people fired up. I'd love to know what
it does.
What is agentic AI to you, and why is it important?
Is it important? Agentic AI is active in a way that the previous model implementations were passive. So the previous LLM implementations, so you're talking, your traditional ChatGPT type of model, you ask it questions essentially, or you make statements, and it will respond. And it's that very. So the response is really the sum total of what the model is capable of producing given your input. Agentic is autonomous. It can take actions, and it can take actions on its own accord without necessarily having been directed. Although if you're sensible, you'll put in place obvious constraints. And in that way, to your point before, it very much resembles RPA or BPA, depending on the flavor, orchestration of some kind, business orchestration of some kind. And it enables the application of AI much more pervasively. Now, having said that, does it really do what it says on the box? In my view, no, it does not. A lot of the agentic AI solutions that are being trotted out now are being sold as turnkey solutions for end-to-end business process implementation that obviates the need for people in most areas, and gives you surety of outcomes and low cost and blah blah blah. I'm finding that is mostly untrue. Mostly what it is, to your point before, is rebadged RPA, which works exactly as RPA is supposed to work, with a little bit of AI sugar on top. So you might put some AI in place at a decision point in the process, for example, and it'll give you, perhaps a richer or a stochastically based decision out of that, whereas previously it would have to be done using some heuristic rules engine or perhaps deferred to manual decisioning by a competent individual. So there's a little bit of that, but for the most part, it looks like a musclier version of what it's always looked like. And then in the other end of the spectrum, it's just fantasy. You've got agentic AI, which looks like it knows what it's doing, and you've got to remember the fundamental architecture of an agentic AI system is not that much different than an LLM. So LLMs I've heard described, I think, just fantastically as stochastic parrots. I think it's a wonderful description. I can't remember who coined it. I wish I could give attribution, but that's a very pithy description of what an LLM is. Agentic AI is a stochastic parrot where what it's producing is a script of action of some kind, and then executing to that action, and executing not always 100% to that script. And so when I'm talking to people about agentic and trying to help frame this in a way that's useful, the analogy I always use is online banking. So imagine you delegated your online banking to a PA of some kind, a personal assistant of some kind. And imagine they messed it up 3% of the time, right? So your online banking went completely awry 3% of the time. Would you trust them with your password and your banking details? No, you would not. Of course not. It's mad. And that's really what you're dealing with when it comes to agentic AI. And that's why the reason I'm raising that is because I think the applicability of agentic AI is there. Like it is a good solution, but it's a solution that you should only use in situations where there is significant fault tolerance. So not decisions that are financial, for example, where things can go awry, not purchasing decisions, not decisions where the consequences of a mistake can be dire. It needs to be something that's fault tolerant. In those areas, yep, you can implement AI, essentially, agentic AI as essentially an automation solution. Now, having said all that, you will find that there is a strong objection to all of the things that I've just said. A lot of the vendors would say, no, the agentic solutions we produce, they're ironclad, they're super empowering, they solve a whole pile of business problems and so forth. We'll have to agree to disagree. It's not what I'm seeing.
I was wondering if we could maybe dig into the most successful, let's call it an AI implementation that you've witnessed, whether it's something you were involved in, something you've seen another company do, even a case study.
Yeah, look, I think to my point before, the most successful things that I've seen are well-established traditional machine learning or statistical analyses that have been implemented under the rubric of AI. If you're talking about LLM implementations, so contemporary generative implementations, let me start first of all with an old and very good example that I'm super happy with. It's not mine. It's one that happened out of Demis Hassibis's lab. So Demis Hassibis is the DeepMind doyen, the guy whose team beat Lee Sedol in the AlphaGo's implementation of a model, an early LLM model from years ago, that really shook the whole industry and was a significant paradigm shift. They then went on to do a model called AlphaFold, which was a protein folding model. And ultimately that team won the Nobel Prize for their work. And it's a beautiful example of how AI can really be used to help the world. And we need more of those, of course, not just make money. Just as a very potted history of that, their team decided under Demis's leadership to apply the technology they developed for AlphaGo. They decided to apply that to the problem in biology of protein folding, which is a combinatoric problem, extremely difficult. Most protein folding solutions, each solution is somebody's PhD. That's the level of problem that you've been talking about up to that point. And then their team went in, they applied these models, and they essentially solved all of the proteins, like hundreds of thousands of solutions. And then finally just published everything on the internet. Just said, here's all the solutions that we've solved. And now it's essentially a lookup. So in biology, in biotech areas, instead of being stymied by the lack of information about particular proteins, it's just a lookup into the database, and there it is. I mean, the contribution that was made it's very difficult to understand. You couldn't possibly overstate the value that it's provided, and those benefits will be reaped for decades to come. They've already started reaping benefits in cancer research and drug development and all kinds of things. So it's a fantastic example of how proper use of that technology can benefit. Now, to bring it back down to earth a little bit, the successful implementations that I've seen, and this goes back a little way, are for the development, for example, of credit models in loans. So this is finance, in the finance space, finance organization that I worked for at that time, the development of credit models. That technology was applied there by the chief scientist at that time, who I worked with very closely, fantastic group of people, and they managed to develop credit models that were much more nuanced and gave much better room for tolerance, better risk. And what that means, better risk management. And what that means is you can give more loans to more people, and you can give more loans to people who might be otherwise deemed a little bit riskier. So people who earn less money, people who are perhaps in a low socioeconomic background, people who might otherwise have been deemed more risk. They have the opportunity to get a home loan, for example. So that application in that particular instance was quite buoying for me. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you want to do.
Yeah. And when it comes to more, I guess, LLM driven solutions, is there anything you've seen work particularly well for, say, normal Aussie businesses?
The cardinal example that I often hold up, because I worked in education for a while recently, as you know, as a director at one of our universities. But the Khan Academy produced an LLM-based solution called Khanmigo, which was an online tutor, an LLM-based tutor, domain-specific. Essentially, this is an online, available 24 hours a day, infinitely patient, infinitely knowledgeable tutor that adapts to your particular learning style as a student, and can be used by pretty much everybody in the domains of knowledge that it was competent. It's a fantastic product, like just so good. This is the kind of stuff that you want to read more about, where you've got a product that is, it's commercially viable, don't get me wrong, but it is helping so many people. Students who have learning difficulties, or students who have access problems, students who perhaps can't travel, all those kinds of things, as well as all the mainstream students, producing fantastic outcomes. It's a great product, and they've continued to evolve that product. I'd hold that up as sort of cardinal examples. In Australia, I don't know. We did a few things at the university to look at augmentation. So one of the concepts that came out of the work that the AI advisory board did was a brilliant notion. One of our academics proposed it, of using an AI as a foil in the context of a tutorial group. Now, what I mean by that is that when students are in a group of people, there's social dynamics at play that mean they're somewhat reticent sometimes to proffer an opinion. There's social constraints that disallow people from being too critical of each other's ideas. There's a lot of inhibitory aspects to sitting in a group of people. If you've got an AI as a participant, which is what he was proposing, people can be as critical as they possibly want. That AI can make statements that are very foolish, or that challenge other ideas, and people can use it as a foil in their discussion. Tutorial groups, it's well established, at least at university level, tutorial groups are the best way of learning, because you're in a small group, an intimate group of peers. You discuss things rather than some sort of pedagogical utterances being given to you. You discuss things, you fail to understand things, you correct each other, you're with peers, etc. It's a fantastic environment, and having an AI in that midst to lubricate that function, to me, I thought that was just an absolutely genius idea.
I wish I had that back at uni. I mean, I wish I had access to the models that everyone has access to now. That would have been, oh my goodness.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, except for the hallucination problem, which is one of the things that Sovereign AI we're addressing directly as well, just to ensure that accuracy is paramount. Except for the hallucination problem, these modern models, they're just a gift. They're just fantastic. Interestingly enough, and I'm segueing here away from your original question, but I would like to raise it as an issue. Some of the research that's coming out very, very lately seems to, and then there was I think a landmark study done at, I want to say Oxford University, but I need to check my references, indicates that students who use AI for learning as opposed to production, so I'm making a distinction there, do worse.
Really?
Do much worse. Yeah, and the thinking is that, so let me paint a picture here. I use AI, of course, all of the time. I use multiple models. It's my job. But I'm drawing upon decades of learning and other things that precedes AI. So I know how to use those tools and to differentiate between something that's useful and something that's not, because I have a sense of judgment that comes from the corpus of learning that I've already established. If you're a student and you're learning it for the first time and you're young, you don't have that. And so it can be very difficult to exercise judgment. And so you can get drawn down avenues that take you to a misconception of some kind, particularly if the model is hallucinating or perhaps skewing the domain of knowledge that you're trying to learn. There's also the sycophancy problem, which is less of a problem now, but still a huge problem. What that means is essentially is that models will tell you what you want to hear. So if you've misunderstood or you have a strong opinion on a particular domain, so let's say you're studying political science, that would be a classic example that I bring up, as opposed to STEM fields, I mean, like you're studying political science and you have particular views on, I don't know, socialism. I'm picking something here out of my left ear. Then the modern models are much more likely to indulge your preconceptions and your philosophies than a competent lecturer would be. And so they will not disabuse you of some of the misunderstandings that you have. These are all huge problems. In addition to which, the final nail in the coffin for the research that I'm citing here is that they tend to become a crutch. So you don't do your thinking, you don't work things through, you just ask the model. I don't do that, and I think a lot of people, I would advocate, I would really strongly advise if people are going to use these tools for this purpose, don't get it to do your thinking for you. Do the thinking first, and then work it through with the AI. Get it to challenge you. I have one AI because I've got a number of spaces that I've set up that I can use. One of them, I've instructed it to be hostile and abusive. I've told it, when you respond, object to everything that I say, be as vituperative and as abusive as you possibly can, and find all the counter arguments to what I'm saying. I've instructed it very directly. And this is probably a paragraph of encouragement to vitriol, because that model is super useful if I'm looking for challenges to ideas that I'm thinking through. And it will indeed, demean and counteract the things that I'm talking about, and it will find references that do counter arguments, and I'll chase those down, and I'll look at a paper that actually tries to debunk what I'm saying. That's a super useful use of that. But that's not common. Most people don't do that. Most people will take the neutral sycophantic model and just run with that.
Yeah, there are a lot of good points there. And I experience all of those. I'm one of those guys, I don't know if you do this as well, but probably since Claude Code came out, pretty much.
Oh, yeah.
I've got, a few screens in front of me. I've gone from kind of manually using all of these screens to having lots of little terminals up. And and I'll have an idea. I'll delegate it to one of the I guess you could call one of the agents. And at the start, I was thinking, wow, this is amazing. I can get it to do that and it'll speed things up. And it very, very quickly got to the point where I had a lot more time on my hands because it was off doing the thing I wanted it to do. And I thought, okay, well, I'll open up another one. I've got time. I open up another one, get it to do something else. Oh, I've got more time again. And so I would get up to, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these terminals open on my screen, just full of terminals. And I found what has kind of happened for me. And it was, I guess something a lot of other people have been feeling too, because I recently saw an article about it, is you start to kind of almost get this weird fog and burnout because you're never kind of, it's like you're constantly task switching. And it made me, I'd love to understand if you have any, like you might have maybe some, like a better way of describing what is going on. And
I think I do.
Yeah.
I think I do. And look, I'm not sure of my ground here because I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any real competence in that area. But here's what I'm observing. People are, as you rightly point out, they're treating AI agents as delegated agents that they can give these tasks to, and more counting them in terms of outcomes rather than in terms of tasks or sequences. And this, in fact, is part of the documentation. If you look at the Fable documentation, it literally says, frame your request as an outcome, not as a sequence of steps you want it to follow or a set of tasks. And it will figure out what it needs to do in order to achieve that outcome. Now, what are you doing when you do that? You are managing. You've become a manager. That's what's happening. So the roles have changed. People are going from being workers, where you are working at the coalface, let's say with the code, if you're a developer, or let's say with the artifacts that you're producing, if you're an architect, or if you're a business analyst, or if you're some other kind of role. People are going from those roles to becoming managers. Everyone is becoming a manager because you now have a team. It's an AI team, but it's still a team. And the way you have to think now is as a manager, not as a worker. And that's not for everyone. Not everyone can manage. Not everyone wants to manage, right? It's not for everyone. And in addition to that, my view is the exhaustion that you're talking about comes from the discrepancy between thinking that you're still a worker and actually being a manager. No manager can operate at the level you're trying to operate at. It's just not tenable. And particularly when you start to manage through people. So when you get to senior management, so you're a middle manager, let's say, or you're an executive, you start to manage through people, right? So you manage people who manage people. You can't operate like that anymore. You're not a worker anymore. It's a different kind of mindset. And I think my advice to people would be, if you start to think of yourself as a manager now, you'll become much less exhausted. Your expectations of outcomes will be commensurate with that role, not with the role you saw yourself in previously. And the way that you go about working and delegating and managing will change as well. To me, it's a better model. I think that's what's going on.
Definitely, and that's exactly how it feels. It's exactly how it feels. It's very interesting. But there's almost, I kind of, have you played any video games before?
Oh, well, many, many years ago, I think, gee whiz, the last game I played was probably Baldur's Gate, I think, back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
Is that still a thing, really?
I think isn't it Elon Musk's favorite game?
Yeah, I didn't know that, really. Oh, okay. I played that, and I played, oh, hang on a sec, here's something for you. I just drew this out I'm trying to cull all of the detritus in my life at the moment. So I'm going through my boxes of old crap and throwing it out or selling it or giving it away. And I found this.
Oh, wow.
Right. Which I played back in the day. I think that's probably one of the last games I played. And this would be, 10 years old? Wild Hunt came out in 2015, somewhere around there, 2016. Can't remember. Anyway, so the answer to your question is yes, but a long time ago. I think that's correct.
Have you played Age of Empires?
I have, yes. Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah.
I went through a bit of a thing with it maybe like 6 months ago where I was playing quite a lot on the weekends. It got a bit addictive. But it is really a lot like that, using these terminals. You've got these 200 agents and you've got to manage them. It's very, very similar.
Yeah.
But it's very tiring.
Look, there are psychological aspects to this that are frankly outside my sphere of competence, but I do know that from the military will often talk about a maximum squad size. So like the minimum military unit that you can have in an army, the maximum size of that is normally about six or seven, right? And then you have your squad leader. You can't have any more than that and directly manage them. There's something about the way, brains have evolved and, our tribal ancestry or something like that, as I say, things that are outside my sphere. There's something about that makes it just too much. If you get any larger than that, you need to break up the team. And I know from having managed teams over the years, for many years, if my team size gets too big, I've got to break it up and put team leaders in place. I just can't manage 20 people directly, for example. Yeah. So this kind of thing you need to keep in mind when you're starting to incorporate the delegation or the building, let's say, of an AI agentic team. You've got to start to structure it that way. And I've seen some recent writings on how to do that, how to build AI agents that are team leaders, for example, how to get them to delegate, how to get them to define what good looks like as an outcome and then to measure it and report back. All of these kind of mechanisms that you need to start to incorporate. But to me, that's the model. You've got to start thinking about these teams as a group of people you are managing.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm wondering whether it comes back, because I think humans can only keep I don't know, remember the exact number, but something like 5 or 6 chunks of information in context. 7?
Yeah.
Maybe that's where it's from. You can only, I mean, it's hard to manage 20 people if you can't have them in your context window.
That's right. Yeah. 7 is apparently the magic number. It's the, IQ tests feature this, and they'll sometimes push the envelope. It's why there was such a flurry of consternation when phone numbers went from 7 digits to 8. The thinking was that suddenly people would be challenged in remembering these because that was the threshold.
Yeah, very interesting. And that gets me onto a post that you wrote.
Oh yeah. Which one?
So you mentioned something which I thought was quite counterintuitive. You thought that the introduction of AI, or at least the modern version of AI, is that it's made hiring good people harder than it used to be.
Absolutely.
I'd love to understand, a bit more about that.
Look, I'd like to take credit for that, but it's not mine. Although I did immediately agree with the article when it came out. It's a thought that I had in nascent form at that point, but I think the Atlantic articulated it much better than I do. So it's an article from the Atlantic from, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, and I'll send you the link if you like, although I think it's on my profile. The basic concept is that we're flooding the zone. That's really what's happening. So the signal to noise ratio has plummeted by simple virtue of the fact that AI has become available as a tool to candidates and to recruiters alike. And so consequently, candidates are now generating completely customized CVs for every role that they apply for, because they can do so at at a mouse click. And then recruiters are using AI to vet candidates because there are so many candidates for every job now. So you've got this sort of arms race, which has produced nothing more than noise on both sides of the fence. And now it's becoming so difficult to differentiate, to weed out the viable candidates. In the executive space, my observation, and this is completely anecdotal, but my observation is now that it's contracted almost exclusively to word of mouth. It's almost exclusively now, here's my network of people whose judgment I trust. I'm going to put the word out. Do you know anyone who can do this? And I won't post it on, the job boards, because it would be pointless. I'll get 300 applicants that all look exactly the same and are all lying. So now it's kind of regressed back to old school networking and word of mouth. That's not a tenable model, of course, in the more commoditized space. So if I'm looking for a powered BI developer, I might put the word out in the network, but more often than not, you go to market, and to my point, you'll get 300 CVs that all look perfect, then you can't differentiate. So that was the summary of the Atlantic article, and I think they nailed it completely. That's what I'm seeing happen at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I've actually been, I guess, in that space for a while now. And my first proper business was coaching graduates to get jobs. Yeah. And so I guess I've seen this firsthand, that it's actually made them worse at getting their first job, because they're just relying on AI to do everything, and AI tells them they're doing everything right. Yeah. And they're not getting any results. But yeah, it was actually funny. I just placed an AI/software engineer at a company in Sydney. He actually started today. And it was I headhunted him through LinkedIn. They gave me a very specific brief, someone who had to have kind of a computer science, maths background, Australian citizen, very particular set of things. I sourced a range of candidates on LinkedIn, reached out directly, and then just did initial interviews with each of them. And he told me, he said, this is so much better. I get to speak to a human. I don't have to apply to all these graduate jobs online and hear nothing back. He was like, this is amazing. So I'm seeing exactly what you're seeing.
Yeah, it's like I don't have a solution for it. It's certainly a key concern to me because, in different roles, I need to source people, and I am unable to differentiate, the signal from the noise. And then, on the other side of the coin, if I'm trying to find a role, which more often than not these days is really word of mouth or something that I see that's interesting, and I'll reach out and have a conversation. Then it's very difficult to differentiate yourself from the great ocean of other candidates or solution providers who are also wading into that space. It's a bit of a feeding frenzy at the moment, and it's particularly problematic in my view in the AI space because it's just out of control. It's a feeding frenzy.
I'm sure you've seen all the trending posts about how companies are realizing how junior engineers are now cheaper than the API
that's
build.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. That's happening all the time now. I mean, if you look at the numbers, and I know that Sam Altman has got into a lot of hot water in recent times for what one might construe as a misrepresentation of the balance sheet, let's say, of his company. The chickens come home to roost. All of this speculative investment and speculative product development has now come under much closer scrutiny, and the expectation is now that they're going to have to start making a profit. So the lost leaders that have been out there up until now are starting to evaporate, and real charging is beginning to happen. Now, that real charging will bite. That is not, $5 a month charging, right? Those days are gone. If you're looking at real AI implementation now for anything beyond, showcase examples, you're looking hundreds of dollars a month if you go a subscription model, or as I think Anthropic has been doing with Fable, token-based licensing, at least for now anyway. You're talking some serious money now. So to your point, exactly, if you can hire a graduate to do a better job for $50,000 a year, which you probably can, or maybe $70,000, depending on what you're dealing with, then you'd seriously consider that. Those graduates, they're keen, they will learn fast, they're trainable, they'll start to very quickly, I think, provide value if they're managed in the right way, as opposed to an AI, which you're going to continue to have to manage. To my point before, if you do get these AIs on board, you're going to have to put them into teams of AIs, and you're going to have a manager who will be spending full time curating their actions and their responses. That will be their full-time job.
I guess that brings us in a full loop back to the beginning, back to sovereign infrastructure. Sure. And local models, potentially.
Well, yeah, I mean, the problem we're solving there is really to do with domain specificity, which is a key aspect, and with data sovereignty. Not just data sovereignty, but model sovereignty as well. We want something that's not under the control of the US government, or for that matter, any government outside Australia. We want something that abides by Australian standards, including privacy. We want something that is hosted and physically and otherwise here in Australia as well. So those things are quite compelling under current circumstances, and I think they'll become more compelling. I'm seeing a massive, what would I call it, nationalistic contraction of solutions, IT solutions, all across Europe for sure, and certainly here in Australia. Asia, I don't have as much exposure to the Asian market, so I can't really say with any surety, but certainly those other markets.
Yeah, definitely. I know you've got to go, so is there anything that you want to say to people watching? Is there anything that we haven't covered yet that you think should be mentioned before we finish up?
Look, there are a ton of things. I think the one thing that stands out is the conversations that I'm having and have been having for some time. And I think one of your questions that we talked about before we began was, where do things go awry? In my experience, they're in two areas. One sort of implementation. It's the usual stuff that you would deal with in the normal hygiene of an implementation program. Do you have a schedule? What's the budget? Who's in charge? What are the roles? Are you tracking? All those kinds of normal things. But the other one is more concerning and an opportunity, I think, to your question. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of what AI is. And that arises, I think, from two principal areas. One is the aforementioned bullshit that's out in the market, which tends to paint a very wrong picture of what AI is and what it can do. But the other one is more interesting to me, and that is what's called theory of mind. I raised this before. So theory of mind, very quickly, is the ability of humans to create a model of people they're talking to or people they're interacting with in their own heads. Right? So right now, Mackenzie, you have a model in your head of what Brian is like. You know, based on previous conversations in our current conversation today, you have a simulator in your head. So if I do something anomalous, I start running around with my underwear on my head or something, that's anomalous because your model predicts very different kind of behavior. Most of the things that I'm saying to you now, the actions I'm taking, are unsurprising because they are aligned with this internal model that you have. And that ability to build that model is quite specific. But where it can be hacked, and where it has been hacked, is by the current implementation of AIs. We've all been hacked, right? When you interact with an AI, you are building a model of a human being because that's your template. That's the archetype you have in your head. And you think what you're talking to is like a modified version of a human. It is not. It is a fundamentally different thing. Completely different thing. It's not intelligent in any way. It is a stochastic parrot. AIs, when you talk to them, they're imbeciles. They don't understand anything about the world at all. And all of the understanding that it seems to have is in your head, not in the model. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding. And so people, they project, they use this theory of mind gets hacked, and they project onto the models and imbue those models with abilities that they don't have. And this is one of the key problems. People get very excited about AI because they interact with it and they think, oh my God, this is amazing. It can do all these incredible things. And it can, right? But not for the reasons that you think it can. And that the nuance of that understanding is a crucial aspect of where you deploy AI. If you understand that modern LLM-based AIs are stochastic parrots, you know you have to deploy them under supervision, right? You have to deploy them into fault-tolerant environments. You have to deploy them into, I'll say technically speaking, you have to deploy them into environments where the grounding problem is not key. And that's kind of a technical thing, but what I mean is the distance between reality and what the words the model is regurgitating is not a deal breaker. Let's say it like that. Because if you understand it properly, you understand these are the constraints on what it can do. So an AI is not a substitute for a person. You cannot, should I mention the name of the conference? I'll mention it, and you can edit it out if you don't feel comfortable. I think it's last year's conference, 2025. Yeah, 2025, last year's conference. All the talk was about headcount reduction. All the behind the scenes conversations, all about sacking people and replacing them with AIs. Everything. And it was all bottom line conversations. We can reduce headcount by such and such. We can reduce costs by such and such and still be as productive or more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can't do that. It's not what AI does. You cannot substitute people for AIs. It's not what they do. You can augment your people with an AI. You can make them more efficient, and you can use that to lead to some kind of attrition if that's the way you want to go, or lead to greater productivity. But an AI is not a substitute for a person. And an understanding, I know I'm rambling a little bit here, but I'm trying to really nail this point. Properly understanding what AI is and is not is the key to a successful outcome from an AI implementation program. You have to do that. You have to understand what you're dealing with. That'll be my closing notes, if that's okay.
What a way to end it.
I hope it's useful. And look, if you need any follow-up or anything, just let me know. I can certainly send you some links for further reading and some of the things that I've cited.
No, that's really fascinating. And yeah, definitely. That's made me think as well, because I think I get rose-tinted glasses thinking about AI. I think it's, yeah. Well, Brian, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know you've got a lot on, so thank you for sharing your time with us. And it's so full of golden nuggets, this conversation. I can't wait to watch it over before I upload it. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. And look, it's been a great pleasure talking to you, and I'm glad I've had the chance to ramble on. I hope it was useful, and I hope it'll be useful to your audience as well.
Thank you very much. And if anyone's watching, thank you for staying till the end, and have a good day.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
See ya.